Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this career guidance webinar. My name is Tammin Nicholson. I'm the program manager for the Career Training USA program at InterExchange. Today's topic is interview tips for in-person interviews and for remote interviews. For those of you who are unfamiliar with InterExchange, we're a cultural exchange organization based in New York City, and we assist international students and young professionals to engage in programs in the United States, and we also assist students and young professionals in the United States engage in programs overseas. The career training program specifically works with interns and trainees who are coming to the United States to train skills related to what they've studied or even some past professional experiences. So while there's been a reduction in people interning overseas this summer and possibly through the fall, we want to make sure that we're still here to provide guidance and assistance for when it is time to resume international internships and traineeships again. And a topic that I think is of interest to students and young professionals in both programs is interview tips, because if you are looking for an overseas opportunity or an interview or an internship in another country, your internship is going to be the key to getting you that position. And most likely it's going to be a remote interview, and remote interviewing is a different style and a different set of skills and techniques and things that you do need to prepare for. So we want to make sure that we can help build those remote interview skills for everyone who's attending this webinar today. So with that, I'm going to move into our outline of today's session. I do want to just make sure that my computer is working and everyone can see that. So Fatima, is everyone able to see the second slide?
Yes.
Great, and I should introduce my colleague Fatima Rodriguez. She's here on the line as well. So if you do have any questions or if you're having any technical issues, please type into the chat box and Fatima will assist you. We do have some built-in pauses for questions throughout the presentation, but if there's anything that you'd like us to go over, please don't hesitate to type into the chat box and we'll stop and we'll address those questions as they come in. But the outline of today's session in a nutshell, we're going to start talking about the differences between an in-person interview and a remote interview, and then we'll move into different preparation techniques and ways to make sure that you go in with all the assets that you need for an interview. We'll talk about what to do during an interview, and then in the second half of the presentation, we'll shift to common questions that might arise and also the best responses you can provide in response to some of those questions in an interview. Lastly, we'll talk about some follow-up and what to do post-interview, and then again we'll have a break for questions at the end, but we'll stop and address anything that comes in via the chat box throughout the presentation. So we'll start talking about any interview, and as we move through this presentation, you'll see the dark blue and the yellow slides. Those will be addressed towards any type of interview. If you see the dark blue and the light blue, that's when we're really specifically talking about remote interviews. But for any interview, it's not so much do you prepare, but how do you prepare and how much do you prepare? And everything you see on this slide is something that a candidate in an interview should be doing before the interview starts. So you want to make sure that you confirm the date and you confirm the time and you know how long it's going to take you to get to the interview or how much time you need in order to be ready to have the interview start. Make sure that you dress appropriately and you dress for the culture of the company and the position that you're looking for. It's also important preparation for an interview to have your resume updated and have your resume on hand or your portfolio, depending on the industry that you're interviewing for. You might have already sent in your resume, likely you did when you applied for the position, but bringing your resume is a good backup in case the interviewer doesn't have it on hand or somehow they've lost it or there's something that's important that you specifically want them to note on the resume. So make sure that you are prepared and you have it with you just in case. But the biggest portion of your interview preparation is most likely researching the company and making sure that you know what the company does, any important current events, any news, the mission of the organization, maybe any staffing changes or key staff that you might interface with if you are to get the position, any relevant updates that might affect the company or might affect the field. Make sure that you really know everything there is to know about this company going into the interview. And once you've done that, practice for the interview. So maybe have a practice interview session with a family member or some friends. Have them toss some questions at you, and you can practice formulating your best responses. Another tip might be to also record yourself as you're practicing this interview, because you can see the cadence of your speech, perhaps any words that you use too often, how you look and how confident you are answering certain questions. I think it might be uncomfortable to watch yourself on camera, but it's excellent practice for an interview, and you know exactly how you demonstrate when you're answering some of these questions. Another thing you can do as far as preparation is not to actually send the thank you, but have the thank you prepared. It's important to make sure that you do send a follow-up at the end of every interview. So if you want to send a thank you via Post-it, get the letter or get the thank you note set to go. Make sure that you have a stamp, you have an envelope, you have all of that taken care of. So after the interview, all you need to do is write it out and pop it in the mail. Same thing for an email. Make sure that you, if possible, collect the email address of the person you might want to send a thank you to. Just make sure you're making it as easy as possible for yourself once the interview finishes to get that thank you note sent off. Now for a remote interview, pretty much everything that I said still applies. You still need to confirm the date and time. You still need to dress appropriately, have your resume there, but there are additional steps that you actually need to undertake for a remote interview. You need to download the interview software. You need to test your audio and your video. You need to find an interview space. Typically, if you go into a company, they have a room where they might do their interviews. In the case of a remote interview, you're responsible for creating that space for the interview. So you need to remove distractions. You need to remove clutter from the interview space, things that you wouldn't be responsible for if you were a candidate who was going into a physical office to conduct an interview. So preparation. We talked a little bit about research and that being an important part of preparation for an interview. And how do you research? What's the best way to move forward with the research? And important is to start on the company's mission and their values page, and have anecdotes to match the traits that you have in your professional experience and your education to the mission and the values of the company. You probably want at least 3 anecdotes for every value that you can find on their website, just so you have more than enough stories or more than enough past experience to pull from and to talk about yourself and to align yourself with the culture of the organization. So make sure that you can demonstrate that fit that you have to a company, but also research some of the professional associations that the company is part of, and this will help you as far as interview fodder. It might help you to understand the focus of the company and what their 5-year plan is and what their 10-year plan is and where they're moving towards. And it might also help you in your own networking. If they're part of an association that you're part of or your current organization is part of, you might be able to bridge that gap between you as a candidate and the company specifically, and have great fodder to go into the interview and things to talk about and things to ask. Speaking of that fodder, look at the interviewer themselves. If you know the name of the person who will be conducting the interview, see if you can find more information about their background. What did they study? What was their previous position? How long have they been at the company? What are their professional interests? Because you can start to build what you might ask around those. You might get a snapshot of the person you're going to be speaking with, and it makes it less daunting. You kind of have an image of who you might be talking to going into the interview. And another important thing to think about is, what are the interview questions you're going to be asked? And that can actually be one of the easier parts of the research. If you look on Glassdoor or LinkedIn or other websites that actually have those questions right there for you to pull up, you can see what current and past employees have said about the interview process. Was it specific questions about the company, or was it related to technical skills? So you have a bit of a sense of what those questions might be. So you go in with a leg up over some other candidates who might not have done that same research. So moving to remote interviews, I talked a little bit earlier about the importance of logistics and making sure that you do have the logistics set up in place for the interview itself. So think about the who, what, why, some of those questions. So the first is, who are you interviewing with? Who are going to be the people that are asking you these questions? How many people will be on the other side of the call? Is it one person? Is it a group format? When is the interview happening? I think it's especially important for a remote interview to make sure that you know exactly what time zone they're referring to. Is there daylight savings in that time zone? Read all the details carefully of the interview invitation and make sure the information is clear. If it's not clear, it's definitely appropriate to reach out to the company and ask for a little bit of clarity about exactly when it's starting, but make sure that interview is not in the invitation that they've sent you before you ask that information. Also think about who is calling who, or what software you're using. Make sure that you're not waiting for the host employer to call you to start the interview when really you should be calling them. And then where are you going to do this interview? And this is what we'll get into right now about finding a quiet, private space where you can conduct the interview uninterrupted. There's no background noise. You've been able to kind of remove any external distractions. Make sure that you have the proper software as well. In that invitation, they might say that the interview is being conducted via GoToMeeting or Zoom or some other software. So make sure that you've downloaded that software, you're familiar with how to use it, you have the strong enough internet to make sure that your video is going to be working. You have a strong enough battery on your computer to make sure that your computer is not going to die in the middle of your interview. You've removed all of those distractions. So maybe you've told your roommates to go out for the afternoon, or you've put the pets into a different room of the house. You've put a note on your doorbell asking any delivery men not to ring the bell so that you won't be distracted that way. I think many people are more flexible as a lot of companies work from home throughout 2020. But if you can eliminate all of those distractions, I think it's one less thing you need to worry about. Another thing you should be mindful of for a remote interview is to also dress professionally. I think oftentimes the joke is you can wear pajama bottoms as long as you have a professional top, but you don't know if you might need to get up and get a new pen, or if you need to close a window, or if you need to plug your computer into a different outlet. And you want to make sure that you're not wearing pajama bottoms and slippers if you do have to stand up. So I would say to dress professionally from head to toe, dress for the job you're interviewing for. It'll make you feel more in the zone, more awake and more ready to conduct a professional interview than if you're sitting in your pajama pants. Also organize the space on your desk. Remove any distractions like cell phones or any additional tabs on your computer. So make sure looking in front of you is professional and organized, and then also make sure looking behind you is professional and organized, so you don't have any strange pictures on the wall or a lot of clutter. Again, you're recreating what an interview space might look like in a host company. So you want to make sure that your space looks professional and looks like a professional interview space where they might be conducting it if they could face to face. Oops. Sorry about that, some technical difficulties. Fatima, can we see my screen again?
Yes, I can see your screen.
Okay, great. All right. So the next slide about software. So make sure that you test your software, your microphone settings work, you have no background noise. The easiest way to do that is to call someone and to test your audio and to test your video and see how it sounds to them. Make sure that your headphones are working, your microphone's working, and ask that person if there's any echo or feedback or additional noise. So again, you know that your software is working and your audio is working. And then test your camera too. Maybe try a few different locations in your house to make sure that the lighting is appropriate and adjusted if needed. Try and recreate the actual space that you want to do an interview in. So prop your computer up so that it's at eye level. And once you have that perfect space set up and you have your lighting and you have an eye level computer, take a picture of what that looks like so you can recreate it once the interview starts. And like I said earlier, pay attention to your background and make sure that that doesn't distract from the interview itself. So once the interview actually starts, what are some things that we should be mindful of once we've done all that preparation and we've hit go and the interview has started? Um, Build rapport with the interviewer. So it's important to start from the beginning and make sure that you've built a connection with the interviewer. And this might be a professional connection or even personal or possibly just based on some projects and in-project connections. So have some ideas of how you plan to connect with this interviewer based on your research. See if you have similar career paths or you've studied similar subjects in university. If there are any personal connections, maybe the same hometown or the same university, figure out a way to possibly work that in to the conversation. I don't think you want to say, I stalked your Instagram and I noticed you went bowling last night and I also enjoy bowling, but there are ways to build professional rapport based on what you can find about an interviewer online and naturally work that into the conversation. Or maybe it's project rapport. Maybe some of the past achievements or work initiatives that you've done match what the interviewer has done as well. So try and develop that strong connection from the outset of the interview. And then throughout the entire interview, demonstrate your interest and your fit for the position. There might be some positions that you're interested in, but you're not a good fit. And there might be some positions that you're a good fit for, but you're not interested in. And the interviewer's job is to make sure that you fit both of those criteria. So expand outward on qualifications that you have that fit both your interest in the position and the fit for the position. Be prepared to talk at length about any achievements you've put in your cover letter that are going to align with the goals of this position. And pay attention to the aspects of your resume and your cover letter or your career history that the interviewer focuses upon. In a remote interview, it's harder to develop your personal brand and to convey that personal brand remotely. So the person on the other end might not be able to see the parts of your body language that show that you're excited and resonate with you. So you might need to show intention in your questions and try and steer the conversation to points that you want to highlight about your personal brand. So for a remote interview, you have an advantage. You can actually have notes and you can have resources and you can have talking points that you can bring up, and you have a bit of a cheat sheet that you couldn't necessarily bring into an in-person interview. If you do use notes and resources, make sure that you keep them at eye level so it's not obvious that you're looking down at your desk and you're reading things that you've already written down prior to the interview. Make sure that they're behind your computer screen, maybe just a few notes that you want to make sure that you talk about. You can practice some of these answers, but don't script them. Don't read off the teleprompter. The conversation should flow naturally, and you should be able to work in those points, but it shouldn't be like you're reading a script. If you do take any notes based on what the interviewer has said, if there's a question you'd like to ask at the end and you want to follow up on, use a tablet for writing that down. Don't type away at your computer. It's going to look like you're not paying attention or that you're distracted, or the audio might just sound like typing in the interviewer's ears. So make sure that you have a tablet at your side if you want to take any notes throughout the interview. And if there are any relevant documents like a resume or even a cover letter or a portfolio that you want to share, put them in one folder on your desktop and make sure that your desktop is clear and clean and you're prepared to share your screen if need be. You never know if they might want to take a look at your resume or they don't have it on hand and you want to share your screen. So make sure that you don't have any strange pictures or a bunch of clutter on your desktop, that if you do need to share your screen, it's easy to do so and it looks professional. Some other tips for a remote interview is related specifically to video. There's no warm-up for a remote interview. There's no waiting room. You don't get a chance to walk down the hallway with the person and build that rapport before you sit down and start the question and answers. So make sure that your first impression is as positive as possible. If you join the video first, it's going to feel awkward, but sit there and smile and make sure that as soon as they come on, they see you smiling and they don't see you, or they don't see an empty chair, or they don't see you not paying attention or off to the side. Wait, it might feel a bit awkward, but make sure that first impression is as positive as possible. Be mindful throughout the interview of your body language and your tone. but not to the point of distraction. So you need to convey that you are interested in what they're saying, that you're eager to join this organization, and that you're listening, and there is a good flow to the conversation, but not to the point that you're not listening to what's being said, or you're not listening to what you're saying yourself. So don't distract yourself to the point where you're not able to successfully answer questions, but do pay attention to language and tone. And use nonverbal cues wherever possible. So nodding, smiling, any type of connection that you can build that shows that you are listening. It's harder sometimes to tell if the person on the other side of the screen is truly paying attention if you're only seeing a small window and you can't tell what else is going on in the background. So make sure you're as engaged as possible in nonverbal ways. Another trick and tricky part of a video call is to remember to look at the camera. So you're not looking at yourself, it's not a mirror, but the camera might not be level with where the screen is. So you want to look into that small dot where the camera's coming from. I know some people put Post-its on their computer to remind them to look up and to look at the camera instead of the person. But if you look at the camera, it again will build a stronger connection and combat some of those technical issues that might arise with a video in a remote interview setting. The other half that we also need to consider is audio. So limit any extra noises. Make sure that all of the computer notifications and tabs are closed so there's no audio noises on your end. Try and limit your own interjections. It's common in a lot of conversation cadence to say, oh, yes, yes, but if you start talking while the other person is talking, your audio might override their audio, or they might need to repeat themselves, and you're wasting valuable time in an interview by going over questions that they've already asked that you didn't hear the full part because you were making small interjections. Again, typing, don't type any notes, write them down, because you don't want to type in the ear of the interviewer. If you're taking notes, I think it's important to also tell the interviewer, oh, I'm just going to write this down, so they know what you're doing. And again, it doesn't look like you're not paying attention. And then verbal cues are really important for a remote interview, and things that need to be taken into consideration. Make sure that there is space between the question that's asked and your answer. So maybe count to 2 before you start speaking, just so you know that the interviewer is definitely done with their question and there's nothing else they want to ask. In the same vein, it might not be apparent to the interviewer that you're done speaking. So when you answer a question, the best way of indicating that you're done speaking is probably to restate the thesis of your answers. You can say, oh, and that is my most successful professional achievement, or, and that's how I learned to successfully manage an event. And it's not just, okay, I'm done speaking, but some sentence that conveys that you're done. And if you need a little bit of time to think, articulate that you need a second to think, because if you just don't answer, then the interviewer might assume that there's some technical glitch, or that you didn't hear the question, or maybe the connection has gone out. So if you need a few seconds, just say, that's a good question. I need a second to think before you start your response. So with that, we're going to pause. We'll answer any questions that have come in so far about interviews and logistics, and then we'll move into the second half of the presentation where we'll talk about common interview questions and how to best answer them. Fatima, have we received any questions so far throughout the presentation?
Yes, so far we have 3 questions. The first question is, what is considered to be appropriate attire?
That's a good question. I think it depends on the company that you're interviewing for. I would say most likely it's going to be business professional. But if you're applying for a company and it's clear that everyone who works there wears jeans and t-shirts, dress a little bit nicer than that. Wear a polo shirt, make sure that you're one step up, but you wouldn't want to go in to that interview in a full suit and tie if you know that's not the culture of the organization. So I think professional attire, lean towards more professional, but you'll figure that out in your research of the company of what they consider to be business attire and what the culture is of that organization.
Okay, the second question we have is, what professional background should I have during my interview?
I think that as plain as possible is probably going to be the best. I would lean as plain as possible. Again, you're trying to create an interview space that you might have an organization. So maybe one picture or a plant or a light. Nothing too cluttered. But I would say if you're thinking about what corner of your house makes the most sense, I would lean towards the corner that has some good lighting, but not a lot of background.
Awesome. And the last question that we have is, what if I can't find information about company values to match to my background?
So if you're researching the company and you're not able to find any company values listed, I would think of some more general company values that most companies would want. So things like leadership, innovation, maybe collaboration, effective communication, good judgment, those type of aspects. You might build anecdotes because they are more general. I don't think there's any company that's not going to want someone who has those skills, but you might also be able to find some company values looking at their social media page or looking elsewhere on their website. And it might be that they don't specifically state company values on their website. You might have to glean from the information that is there. But there's a reason you're applying to this company. So my assumption is that you definitely have some background that's going to match the company values. And if you don't, I would question what made you most interested in the company to start with, and then try to work from there. Great. So I think we will move on to question and answers and how to best answer some interview questions as they come up. So we'll start with kind of a formula for best answering interview questions. The most important part is to be clear and to stay on point and answer the question that was asked of you. Sometimes people will just freeze up and they'll just start speaking when a question is asked to them, and the answer that they're giving does not match what was asked. So make sure that your response is clear to what was asked of you, but is also concise. Avoid these elaborate rambling stories if you can answer a question in less than 30 seconds, or if they ask you a simple question, provide a simple answer that expands on that question a little bit, but is not going to take up a fifth of the interview telling a story that could have been shortened and answered a lot easier. One reliable way that you can answer behavioral questions is using the STAR method. So the STAR method is situation, task, action, result. So you kind of go through all of these four components by answering the question in a bit of a story form. So you can start by describing a specific event or situation, nothing generalized, use an actual event, and be sure to give enough detail that the interviewer understands what this situation is. It can be from a previous job or even an internship in the past or any relevant educational professional experience. And then focus on the task within that situation that you're working towards. What was the specific thing that you were trying to accomplish? And what were the actions that you took to accomplish that task? So make sure that you're keeping the focus on you and you're talking about the specific steps that you took and what was your particular contribution. You're the person interviewing, so you don't want to describe group work, or you don't want to do anything that's going to devalue the actions that you actually took. Try and use the word I and not we when describing the actions that moved forward towards the result. The result is the outcome of what you did. What happened? How did it end? What did you accomplish? What did you learn? If possible, your results should quantify and use some specific numbers as results to give the interviewer an idea of the progress that was made. So an example of using the STAR method might be if someone asked you to describe a time that you went above and beyond to complete a project. You could say, in my last position, my manager fell ill right before our big annual fundraiser. I volunteered to fill in and coordinated with various teams to ensure the event was a success. I held an emergency meeting with all of these different teams, and we made backup plans for media relations, logistics, budgeting. The event was a big success. We had more than 10% funds raised in the previous year, and I enhanced my knowledge into new areas of business operations. So it's very to the point. It describes the situation, the tasks that needed to be accomplished, the specific actions you took of organizing those different meetings and making sure the event happened, and then the overall successful results. So using the STAR method might take a little bit of practice. You might need to rearrange some of your anecdotes and your stories, but you can use this outline as a successful blueprint for many behavioral questions that will be asked of you throughout the course of an interview. With that, we'll move into some of the common questions that do come up in a lot of interviews and what the interviewer is really hoping to hear when they ask you that question. And we'll start with the first question in many interviews, which is tell me about yourself. So they're asking you to sum up your education and professional background in 60 seconds and talk about what makes you a good fit. So ensuring that there are connections between your background and the position that you're applying for. They're not asking for your hobbies or to know where you grew up. They want to make sure that you as a candidate match what they're looking for in the open position. Another common question is why you're interested in this role. So this is your opportunity to identify the responsibilities in the job description that are most interesting to you and also match your background. So be sure to include what you hope to learn from the position, but also talk about what you would contribute to the organization, and that piques your interest in this open position. Another starter question is, what do you know about our company? This is your time to shine. You've done all this research, you've done all this preparation, so demonstrate that you've prepared for the interview. You know what the company's mission statement is, you know who their biggest clients are, research some recent news articles about them, the website, the blog, those are all great places to show that you know about the company. They're not expecting you to maybe recite all of the specific numbers. You don't have to go off on a long diatribe of what the company does and all of that, but you can certainly show that you've done a significant amount of research and that you know what you're applying for, what their mission is, what their goals are, and that you're excited to possibly join that team. Another question is, what makes you a good candidate for this position? So don't simply list your positive attributes. Make sure that you list the unique qualifications that you have, and that's going to make you a better candidate than the next person at the interview. So show through those positive attributes, what are some quantifiable skills that you have that will make you the best person to fill this position. And those should be technical skills. Those should be specific kind of skills that they can be proven that you have that makes you an excellent candidate for that position, and not the vaguer skills like organized and a good leader. If those are skills that you have, excellent, but prove it as you talk about what makes you a good candidate for that position. So moving into some of the maybe tougher questions, some of the more behavioral questions that you might be asked in an interview. What are your biggest strengths? And that goes back to the last question as well, as far as discussing the technical skills that you have related to the position that are going to make you a seamless fit for this organization. You can talk about some of the softer skills, but if you do, make sure that you figure out a way to segue that into technical skills that they are looking to hire in this opening that they have. The converse question, the other question that a lot of host employers will maybe follow up with is, what are your biggest weaknesses? And I think this can be a really hard question to answer for a lot of people. The important part of this question is to focus not on the weaknesses, but how you're actively working to minimize those weaknesses, or how you're improving in those areas. You don't want to say something negative about yourself and leave it at that. The trick here is to turn that negative into a positive. So if there is something that you feel is a weakness, talk about how you've improved upon that weakness, how you're actively working to improve upon that weakness, and that there is progression, and that you you've been able to identify that as an area of improvement and that you've worked towards improvement on that area. Another question that comes up often in interviews is, what do you consider to be your biggest professional achievement? It's a great way to drill down into the areas of your professional experience where you're most interested in and where you would thrive the most. So use this answer to showcase your enthusiasm for the role, because it gives you the opportunity to do different work and different training that is related to some of the past professional achievements that you've done, whether it's project related or it's in a specific field that you've found interest in the past, and now you get to do it full time. Show that your professional experience that you have on your resume, show that this is not just experience that you have, but it's also enthusiasm you have, and it's an area of targeted growth, and that you want to continue to focus on some of the past professional achievements that you've built on your resume. Another common question that can be difficult in an interview is talking about a challenge and how you've dealt with it. When a host employer is asking you to talk about a challenge, they're asking you to answer two questions in one. Basically, demonstrate how you both identify problems and how you solve problems. So this gives you a chance to talk about your problem-solving skills, but then also your planning skills and your resourcefulness and your judgment and other attributes that are probably going to in some way tie into the values in this company. So you can talk about what you feel is a challenge and how you've been able to identify those challenges, because what you say is a challenge at work might be something that someone else doesn't view as a challenge. So you can show you see problems, and when you do see problems, you're able to solve them, and you can use the STAR method to talk about how you're able to deal with some of those challenges too. Right, so we'll do two more as far as answering questions in an interview. These typically come towards the end of an interview, but what are you looking for in a new position? And if you're asked that question, you can highlight the ways that you hope to expand upon your current skills and knowledge. So we talked a little bit about drilling down into what excites you the most. This, in the same vein, you can drill down into what would be the natural next step for you based on the professional experience that you've accumulated so far or the educational experience that you do have. And lastly, you might be asked why you're leaving your current role. And if that's the case, don't use this question to talk negatively about your current company. You don't know, well, you hopefully know from your research if the interviewer has maybe worked at that organization in the past, or if they have a strong relationship. You don't want to burn any bridges, especially if you're still at that role. So discuss what you like about your current role and what you like about the company, but why you think you've outgrown the role, why you're seeking new challenges. You can compare the current role that you have and the anticipated role that you'd like to fill, and you can talk about the differences in those roles. But when you're comparing them, highlight the pros of this new role and don't necessarily talk about the cons of your current role that might be apparent in what you don't say. But you don't use this question to talk negatively about your current host employer. Just talk about the differences, and I think that the interviewer will understand what you're conveying and why you might be leaving your current role, but you don't at any point ever want to say anything bad about a place that you're currently training or working at. With that, we'll move into questions that you should ask the interviewer. So some questions that you're going to want to make sure at the end of the interview don't get left on the table and you do get a chance to ask. It's important for any interview that you do ask questions. So make sure that you come prepared and you have a bunch of questions that you want to ask. If you don't get a chance, if those questions are asked or answered throughout the interview and you don't get a chance to ask them first, make sure that you have some backup questions that you can ask the interviewer. So I put on some 4 common ones. You definitely want to have a little bit more, but you can ask the interviewer to describe their work environment and their office culture. I think this is a pretty common question for a lot of people who go into an interview, but it's an important question to ask in 2020, as a lot of companies are moving to new work cultures and new work environments. You can ask them how they're able to maintain connections with employees and interns. If certain people are working remote, or if people are working in different time zones. I think that's a really relevant question to ask right now. It might come up in the course of your interview, but I would try and make sure you work that into the conversation at some point. Another question to ask would be to get an example of a project that interns might be working on. You kind of know what the contours of the position are, but it's nice to be able to focus on what specific projects you'll be doing and what you'll be learning. You can also turn that question around and remind the host employer that, oh yeah, you have experience on that type of project, or you can reinforce some aspects of your resume to show that you've done similar projects, and you would be a great asset and a great part of the team if they do decide to hire you. Similarly, you can ask about the most challenging aspects of this position. And so when you ask about what the most challenging aspects of the position are, the host employer will tell you those, and you can also reinforce, oh, well, I have experience in overcoming those challenges based on my past experience doing X, or the story I told about Y. So you can use these questions to reinforce the positive aspects of your skills and your resume. The last question also fits neatly into that vein about the skills that are most important to this position. You can highlight the skills that you've put on your resume that show that you're a good fit for this organization. So these are 4 sample questions. I mean, you can also ask about the day-to-day responsibilities or the typical career path of someone who might go into this field. There's a lot of questions that you can ask, but the most important thing is that you do have some questions that you ask at the end to show your enthusiasm for this role. Another question that I would make sure doesn't go unanswered is, what are the next steps in the interview process? So you know what the timeline is, if there's going to be another interview with another person, you kind of know what's happening next, and you don't walk out the door feeling like that interview went great and then not knowing what the next steps are. So make sure that you do wrap up and you know what's happening after this. Conversely, there are some questions that you don't want to ask. And I put some samples here too. I think the first one are what are the requirements of this position? I think that is a pretty basic question that hopefully you've been able to figure out in your research. You knew before you applied to the job or the internship, or it's been discussed during the interview at some point. So if you're asking, what will I do if I get hired? It's going to convey to the host employer that you're either not listening or you're too lazy to do the research. So you don't want to ask any basic questions about, what does the company do? Who are your competitors? You should know all this information. And you can ask more targeted questions about maybe some of the nuances of the position. But you don't want to ask, like, what is this I'm applying for? You should definitely know that answer before you walk in the door. You also don't want to discuss salary or benefits or have you gotten the job during the interview. Those are all questions that the HR office will typically take care of. You're focusing on the skills that you have and the opening that they have. And if you do get hired, you can talk about work hours and benefits and salary when your packet has been issued to you as far as your offer letter. How quickly can I get promoted is another question that I wouldn't recommend asking in an interview, because it shows that maybe you're interested in this company, but you're not interested in this position. So if you're already looking to the next opportunity, it's most likely not going to be a good fit. So I think it's okay to talk about the career paths that people might have in this field, but you don't want to talk about the next opportunity before you've even been offered this option. And lastly, anything that has already been answered during an interview, do not ask that question. So you might have a list of 3 or 4 questions, and they've answered all 3 of those questions, or all 3 or 4 of those questions. Figure out something else that you can ask, or drill down into some of those questions for a little bit more information. But don't just restate a question that they've already answered for you. So we'll do one more slide, and then we'll move into any questions. What to do after an interview. So send a personalized thank you. Like I said, you can have the envelope and the stamp and the letter all ready to go. But write the thank you after the interview and follow up on any conversation points that might be salient so that you can remind them what you discussed and why they were really excited about you at the time and remind them why you're such a good candidate. So send that personalized thank you and get that off as soon as you can. But if you find in your question, if they tell you that they're not making a decision for another couple weeks or they have a few more people they'd like to bring in, you can send an email and you can also send something via post so that they get multiple thank yous and you have a little bit more time. If you think they're making a decision right away, I would send an email thank you so that they do get that follow-up as soon as possible. It's also appropriate to check in for updates. If they say that they'll have a decision in a couple weeks, I think it's fine to check in a couple weeks and see if you haven't heard anything. But you don't want to follow up every single day, but it's certainly appropriate to check in and see if there's anything else that they'd like from you, if there's any future steps, or anything that that you need to be mindful of as far as what the next steps are in the process. If you don't get the position, make sure that you stay cordial and you think about future opportunities. So maintain a network with this company and see if there's any suggestions they might have for you to develop yourself as a candidate, add to your skills and experience. Not every company is going to provide feedback, but you might have an interviewer who says, yes, we really liked you, but we need you to have a little bit more experience in this area or that. And maybe you can apply to the company in a couple of years when you do have those skills and experience, and it would show that you are serious, you are dedicated to joining their team, because even though you didn't get the position now, 2 years later, you're applying again because you've gone and you've developed the extra experience they're looking for to successfully join the organization. So with that, we will conclude the presentation. And in fact, if any questions come in, we can certainly answer those now.
Yes, we have 4 questions. The first question is, what's the best way to answer, where do you see yourself in X years?
That's a great question. I think if someone asks where you see yourself in the future, you want to think about where you might be in the future with that company. So think about what, if you did get the position, what you would hope to learn, how you would hope to grow, and how that would still make sense in the capacity of that organization. If you say in 5 years you hope to develop skills that would make you not relevant to them, then I don't know if that's a great answer. But if you think about someone who is 5 years further down the line in your career path, think about the skills, the positions that they're in, and that's probably what's gonna make you a natural fit for that organization, assuming that's true. If that's not true, then I wouldn't necessarily say that, and I would reconsider if you do see yourself with that company in 5 years.
Okay. The second question is, what do I do if I don't know how to answer a question?
I think you should take a breath, give yourself a little bit of time to think about the question, but you should give some answer. So this is why it's really important to practice and to have anecdotes and to have examples that you can bring up. If there is a question that you absolutely can't answer and you can't speak to, try and think of an example that's tangent, that maybe you don't have experience in leading a team as a direct manager, but maybe you can provide an example of how you led a team in university and you were in a leadership role there. So think about areas that might be tangent to what they're asking. Like we said earlier, you want to make sure that you're clear and concise and you're not just rambling, but do your best to provide an answer and not just say, oh, I don't know, or I don't have anything I can answer to that. Make sure there's some way that you can touch upon what they're asking you.
Okay, the other question that we have is, what if my questions have already been answered during the interview?
So that's a possibility, and that's maybe the sign of a good interviewer, that they've been able to answer all of your questions before you even get to the question answer. Like I said earlier, make sure that you have a significant list of questions that you could pull from. But if all of your questions have already been answered, maybe go back to one of those questions and say, I know you already told me about this project, but can you tell me a little bit more about how you think it will play out over the course of the next 6 months, or where do you think that project will be in 2 years? So you can go back to some of those questions and ask for a little bit more depth or even a little bit more clarity. But in an ideal situation, you maybe had some other questions that have come up during the course of the interview that you've been able to write down and ask, or you have a fuller list of questions that you can go to and they haven't been able to answer everything for you in the 30 or 60 minutes that you've been on the phone with them.
Great. And now there are 2 more questions. How long should a star response be?
That's going to depend on the actual question that's been asked of you. You, again, don't want to go on a rambling response. I would say 60 seconds is probably about the best, but if it's more in-depth story or a more in-depth question, you can certainly go a little bit longer if you have more important details to say. This is where it's important to pay attention to the visual clues or the audio clues that you're getting from the interviewer themselves. If they look bored or if they're trying to interject and move you along, cut the story short. But if you see that you have time, you can maybe expand upon the star response that you're providing.
And the last question, how long should I wait to follow up after an interview?
Again, it's going to depend on what the interviewer has told you. If they say that they hope to have a decision by the end of the week, if you haven't heard by the end of the week, follow up midweek the next week or early the next week. If they tell you that there's 3 more candidates they're going to bring in over the course of the month, then you're going to want to give them a little bit more time before you follow up. So it depends on what the timeline is of the host organization. And that's why it's important before you walk out the door that you actually know what the timeline is, and you're prepared to wait if need be, or follow up soon if you haven't heard anything. So if there are
That's all the questions.
Great. So there are no.
We have one other question actually.
Oh, okay.
The question is, should I bring up issues related to visas, immigration status, or sponsorship?
What a great question to end this session on. I would say no. I don't think that it's important to go into the details of visa sponsorship in the interview component unless the interviewer does bring it up, because there's most likely nothing to gain from that. If you have filled out the application and you've already told them that you're able to work or you need a J1 visa sponsor, that's fine, and we can discuss all of that afterwards. But as long as they know they're hiring you for an internship or a position, and they know what the rules are of the visa category, I think that's totally fine, and we can work through those logistics with them as a visa sponsor afterwards. But it's nothing that I would discuss with the interviewer, because similar to benefits and salary, usually the HR office is going to work through those logistics. So you don't want to throw the interviewer off by getting into details that they're not really sure of themselves and adding to confusion. With that, we'll conclude this presentation. Thank you everyone for joining, and I hope this was useful, and I hope it was a useful hour for everyone. So take care. Thank you.